Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this panel. I'm Laura Lindsay. I'm the Advancement Director at MinnPost. And thanks so much for coming to MinnPost Festival. We're so happy you're here. If you're looking for dialogue across difference on campus, you are in the right place. And feel free to fill in these seats in the front. Even if you're not a sponsor or VIP, you're welcome to come sit in the front. Don't be shy. I also would like to thank all of our supporters and our sponsors and remind you that the MinnPost tote bags are available until about 5:30 outside if you're a member, and if you're not, you can donate using the QR code on the back of your badge to get a tote bag today. Yeah. They're really cute and limited edition for the festival. We'll leave time for questions, so be thinking of your questions in advance. And yeah, this is a big panel, so I'm just going to introduce everybody briefly. Right here, we've got our moderator. This is Jake Loesch from Citizens League, who is Citizens League is also a MinnPost Festival sponsor. We've got Jackie Font-Guzmán, who is the Senior Vice President for Equity and Belonging at St. Catherine University. We've got Dr. Duchess Harris, a professor of American Studies at Macalester College. Tane Danger, the co-founder of Danger Boat Productions, and Rachel Leatham is the Director of Career and Student Success at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. So please join me in welcoming our amazing panel.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. I could probably sit here and talk to them all for hours about dialogue across difference on college campuses. If you're familiar with my organization, the Citizens League, finding ways for people to engage across difference is really part and parcel to what we do. So this is a fascinating conversation, and I'm thrilled to be here with you all today. We're going to start maybe with a loaded question, but something that I think is probably on all of our minds. College campuses often, I would say, at the forefront of deciding what is considered free speech and when that might cross a line. No shortage of university leaders, people in the news. We only need to look at even incidents around the Gaza and Israel situation to see that this really plays out on college campuses. Naturally, I mean, they're a pressure cooker, right, for ideas where students explore and debate. So those tensions can rise quickly. But I'd love to hear a bit more from each of you about your institution's philosophies or approach to this role in fostering constructive debate and really balancing that free speech and diversity of perspectives that are inherent on campuses. Dr. Font-Guzmán, maybe we can start with you since you're immediately to my left.
That's what I get for sitting next to you. All right. Well, thank you for the invitation, and thank you all of you for coming. For us is St. Kate's University or St. Catherine University. We really try to live by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet's mission and values, which is the founders of St. Kate's. And they have this amazing saying that they live into it, which is, love your neighbor without distinction. And so for me, when you talk about this and you ask the question, how does that informs us, it means that you really, truly need to be in community with each other. And to be in community with each other, you need to be able to move forward together, speaking your truth, right? And without silencing voices, or without creating artificial differences or suppressing conversations. And so if we really want to live into that, and if that is our philosophy at St. Kate's, then we absolutely need to value free speech and protect it and enhance it and support it. And even though the university is a private university and we are not held to the same standards in terms of free speech legally, for us, free speech transcends legal, right? There's a legal thing to do, there's a moral thing to do. And so we want to create a campus where the aspiration is for people to be able to have those conversations and speak their truth while at the same time moving forward together and doing what we want to do, which is educate our students to actually be citizens and go out, influence the world, cause some good trouble and change it.
For this one, let's just go down the row, and then I'll ask each of you some more specifics. Dr. Harris.
Okay, so the trustees at Macalester are on campus right now because this happens to be family weekend. And we have some students that wrote a proposal for the trustees to consider divesting from 3 companies in Israel. And the proposal came to the college's attention in April. And so I was the lead faculty member that convened people to discuss if it should be forwarded to the trustees all during May and June, and we recommended that. And so what I think is somewhat unusual about Macalester is that we're really top-heavy alumni trustees. So the trustees actually wanted to meet with the students and invited to meet with the students. It must have been like Thursday. And so the students felt heard and listened to, which is very different than like other moments on campus. I have to say, this is my 30th year there, so I've seen the ebbs and flows of many things.
And unique in this conversation about that exact situation and what we're seeing on other campuses as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I have relatives that found out that I was the point person, and they said, "Do they hate you?" And I was like, "No, I think this is actually going to be civil." And it's been extremely civil, which I think has a lot to do with who's at the table. And the students have their frustrations, but not so much so that they're like occupying buildings or anything like that.
And I should just say, I'm on this panel in part because I'm doing some work in this space. I've gotten to partner with some of the folks at the Humphrey School in particular and St. Kate's, but you all are like living it every day. I think that just though I would pick up on something the two of you already said, and I'm imagining Rachel will add, is that one of the key pieces to answer your question, like how do you like create the space for this free speech, is that you have to start before that like huge important like pressure cooker thing comes up. And I think that that's sometimes where we see places like get in trouble, is like if they wait until there's something explosive that is about to happen and they haven't built that culture of like a set of values of like what is it that we believe with each other about like how we are going to operate as a community, or what are the mechanisms that we have for some of the dialogue to happen either again on campus with trustees or with faculty or presidents or whoever it is. Like, I think that one of the things that I'm feeling like a lot of spaces are new but are probably like re-engaging with is like, how do we build that infrastructure early so that we are prepared for like when things are going, and we have some shared language, some shared values, some ways that we can navigate this together, and it's not we're trying to build that pressure cooker while like the thing is also like bubbling over.
I know we have three very reputable institutions of higher education here, but I think you have an audience of people who might want to enroll in Danger University when you're ready. Tane.
Yeah, Danger Boat University. Not quite Clown College. So yeah.
Rachel, please go ahead.
So building off of that particular story, I'll bring it super local. So I've been at the Humphrey School for about 14 months. And my charge when I was brought to the Humphrey School was really to focus on career and student success, but more importantly, to build community, to prioritize the student experience and that relationship building in a way that recognizes coming out of COVID, coming out of recognizing a very partisan environment, and thinking about how do we equip students with the skills that they need in order to engage in those spaces. In the first year, what I observed was in the classroom, we would have students who would be wanting to disengage with the content that was being taught, or I had interpersonal issues between students who were canceling or disengaging from one another from difficult conversations because it was too hard to navigate those spaces, and so stepping out. So the learning environment, by and large, overall, it's fantastic. It's an exciting place to be, but there were those instances that really made us question, what are the tools and skills that we need to equip our students with that is an obligation of us that we can no longer count on students bringing to a graduate level education and starting from way back at square one. And so it's about, not even about the content of what people are saying, it's about how people are treating one another in community, meeting each other with curiosity and openness, and trying to create those spaces where we can work on those issues together. That's where I would say the rubber meets the road for me.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's one of those areas that we've seen at my organization as well. Sometimes actually even finding people who are willing to engage in debate or discussion with people they disagree with is hard. Right? We're in a really toxic environment where it's like I'd rather just be quiet rather than say what might be on my mind for fear of offending someone or getting canceled. It was a Constructive Dialogue Institute report in 2023 that said at least 45% of students have reported feeling that way, and so they don't speak up on campus. And I guess I'd like to talk about that a little bit. What, maybe particularly for the three of you representing universities, are you seeing that on campus? And is there any, do we feel like students and faculty actually have the freedom to express their views, even if they may be contrary to what the majority may be feeling? Or is there more that we need to do to try and encourage that kind of healthy dialogue? Does anyone want to start?
I mean, I can start.
Thanks, Rachel.
Just in terms of, like, as I said, people worry about being canceled. They worry about stepping outside of the norm of what they think will be perceived, and they worry about being canceled and not being respected. They worry about their reputation. So how can we create an environment where, in fact, so my school is Graduate School for Public Affairs. We are training future public leaders, people who are going to be in leadership roles, or just people who are going to be working in management or in government roles who need to represent the common good. And if we can't grapple with the messy issues of maybe being uncomfortable with the topics or ideas being put forward, I think we're doing a disservice to our students. So that's where we start with this assumption. And so I do see it. And I mean, it's interesting too, from the career lens, I will have students come and close the door and say, I want to work for the defense industry, or I want to work for the private sector. And those are things that they are not necessarily comfortable sharing with their peers. I think I really want to work on our environment so people can feel comfortable expressing meaning and purpose and their values in a way that they don't get canceled for what they say.
Thanks.
We've been really deliberate about this at Macalester. So about 3 years ago, we had an alum who had worked extensively on the Hill, particularly for Hillary Clinton. And he understands how left-leaning Macalester is. For those of you all don't know, Mondale taught there, Humphrey taught there, and he felt like students don't have a lot of experience with the other side. And so he gave us some grant money to participate in this program called Congress to Campus. And what Congress to Campus does is take 2 former members of Congress to come on college campuses and to talk about a topic that you choose. And so 2 years ago, we were thinking, maybe gun violence. And they were like, what if, 3 days before the event, something happens and people are too upset. And so then we came up with reproductive rights. And this was June because we were thinking that Supreme Court was going to open up in October and have their deliberations. We agreed with Congress to Campus with this, and 10 days later, Dobbs happened. It also was summer, and the students weren't on campus. We wanted to have the students to participate, but we didn't get the clearance from Congress to Campus that they'd accept our institution. And so by the time they did, the students were gone. So they came back in the fall and they said, look what you did. You went behind our backs and you want to debate our, uterus. And they're like, it's just wrong. And so there's just this big explosion on campus and students protested, particularly my advisees. And I didn't know how to feel about that. But we went out of our way to say, you have to watch how these conversations happen. And so then last year when we did it as free speech, right? And by then we were connected, so we were able to have students be involved and figure out how they could participate. And this year we're doing it October 28th, and it is going to be election integrity. But it still is a challenge because when I started working at Macalester, there actually was a Republican club, and now there no longer is.
Interesting. And you're clearly picking non-controversial topics. That's good, yeah.
On purpose.
But I do want to give I want to give some credit to Macalester's President Rivera, who a quote that I really appreciate. One of my highest priorities is to ensure all members of this community feel included and all voices can be heard, even the ones that challenge or upset us. We must do all we can to promote the exchange of ideas, anticipating that it will sometimes result in passionate conflict. I think that's what this is really about, right? There are always going, this is the human experience. There are always going to be things that challenge us to think differently or that we really feel run contrary to what our own beliefs are. How do we actually still approach those conversations being open to hearing something? not even about changing our mind. I think that's where we often go, is it's like, you're trying to change my mind, you're trying to convince me of something. Understanding is a two-way street, and I really think that that's where a lot of it, where we skip ahead from that part in many ways. Now I'm just off on my own tangent, but...
Yeah, no, I think that that's absolutely right. And it go well. So I worked with the Humphrey School on building a training curriculum that we had all incoming Humphrey School students do as part of orientation this year. And like it very much speaks to like some of the things that we're talking about here. Like one of the pieces, like Rachel used the word curiosity, was like one of the very first things that we were like, a value that you have to hold is like, how do I go into conversations with people listening with curiosity first? Because you may end up wanting to like change somebody's mind. You may like believe that passionately, but it's actually, you're much better equipped to do that if you understand what the other person believes and why. And so starting from a place of like, I want to figure out why you think this, is actually a really powerful way both to potentially make a connection with this other person, but then also, yeah, if at some point you want to try and change their mind. But resetting to that like curiosity mindset first is like, I think, a really key piece of this. So I think that is a huge part of it, and yeah, that you have to be open to being able to potentially change. The one other thing that I would just like throw out, like in this sort of like us closing up and it being challenging, that I think is valuable, because I'm guessing like if I were to, how many people like at some point have not said something because they're worried that like the other people in the room would like cancel them or be upset at them, or like Thanksgiving would be ruined, right? Like I'm guessing like almost all of us have had that at some point. One thing that is somewhat different to understand about a generation that's coming up now is that they have grown up in a time where they are constantly kind of under a camera, like in a way that is different than any of us probably growing up. Like I grew up sort of right as the internet was coming up, but imagine like living as like, you know, everything is potentially like a social viral thing. And whether that's factually true or not, that just kind of gets acclimatized to like how you think about the world. And I do think that that is like a piece that adds like this extra layer of pressure. Like, oh my God, it's not just that I'll say something dumb and the people around me will like think that it's dumb, but like it could get taken and like run with, and that makes people really anxious.
I think, I mean, to build on all of this, at St. Kate's, one of the things that we're focusing right now is focusing more on the process than the subject matter content.
Yeah.
So we realize that it's not only students, but it's faculty and staff who also are like, how do I deal with someone committing a microaggression in my classroom, or offending someone, or talking about Palestine, or reproductive rights, you name it. So that it was not only students, but that it's also our faculty and staff. So we have been focusing on the process, the how to, what do we do. So we have started some dialogues that are actually going to start next week about democracy and dialogue. And what we are doing is shifting into, we're focusing on two skill sets. So I love you bring up curiosity, because those are the two things that we will be practicing with different topics that are controversial. And one is entering the space with curiosity, and the second one is how do I suspend my judgment so that I can be curious as I do that. And so that's going to be, you're just going to focus on doing those two things, and we're going to have them at their tables choose what is it that they want to do. Do they want to talk about Palestine? Do they want to talk about understanding that even before we start having those conversations, we need to have a set of skills that actually inform that conversation. And I think that's how we're proceeding right now, and listening. And the other piece is listening for what? Because I'll tell you that as a Latina, as a Puerto Rican woman, when people tell me, let's come and talk about X, I'm like, not again, right? Yeah. Another conversation. So the other issue is engaging in those dialogues with a purpose. What is happening out of that conversation? I'm a strong believer that we are responsible for what we hear. Mm-hmm. So for me, bringing you together to have a conversation or a dialogue about something you dearly care about, and our academic institution or our campus community cares about, and to just then, great, now you have a skill set, go practice it, is not enough. So what are we gonna do with the information we gather in those processes so that then it can come back and inform what policies need to be changed, what things do we need to do different so that we can be in community?
I love that. Rachel, I'm going to go to you next because I think some of what Dr. Font-Guzmán was saying is connected to some of the work at the Constructive Dialogue Institute that the Humphrey School is a part of. So they use 5 principles, as I understand it, for fostering dialogue across differences. Let go of winning, get curious, share stories, navigate conflict with purpose, and find what's shared. They seem like relatively straightforward ideas, but the devil's in the details, and this work is easier said than done when we're talking about feelings and emotions and passion around important topics that impact people's lives. I'd love to hear more from you about how the Humphrey School is thinking about applying those principles, both in programming and in classrooms.
Yeah. So last year we were invited to join a consortium of 14 different schools of public policy by the Volcker Alliance to participate in a partnership with the Constructive Dialogue Institute. The idea was to introduce these concepts to our student body and bring them into our community in any way that made sense for who we are. So what we thought about was, how do we make sure that as many students can participate in this learning as possible? So that's why we decided to introduce it to all of our incoming students and our international fellows and our mid-career program. So we had over 150 students who were given the curriculum this summer in a flip the classroom sort of experience. So they did an online module introducing all of those different components, spent 2 to 4 hours before even coming onto campus. And on the first day of orientation, on the Monday morning, we spent 3 hours with Tane and his production company to do improv and to do, so using the humanities to help get people out of their comfort zone. And what was so fascinating about that is when you invite students in a community to get out of their comfort zone and to really get into a space of learning, it disrupts some of those things that you think you need to show up with. So we didn't stop and talk about, at the Humphrey School, this is how you navigate, this is how you get to the lockers, da 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 da. We started with, okay, come into this space and be prepared to suspend your beliefs and assumptions. And Tane can talk more about this. But the first thing was like this awesome exercise of catching a ball, like so we broke into small groups. And in those groups, students were invited to pretend catching a ball, pretend not like failing at catching the ball, and then applaud at one another. So this act of like publicly failing, feeling sort of ridiculous and really uncomfortable, and then celebrating that. So the notion that we celebrate failures, we celebrate learning, we're in this community together, nobody knows more than another person. It's all this act of building trust and building relationships, which really resulted in, for the next 3 hours, people being able to connect. And then the rest of the week, and now into the school year, we're 5 weeks in, and we have this sense of community and trust and vulnerability, and I'm not hearing about conflicts the way that I had last year, which is remarkable to me. And I think a lot of it is because we said, we're gonna trust you to be together in community, to make mistakes and to learn how to do that and to model it. But I don't know.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty. The one piece I would just say on I think a key piece of this, and it is it's a valuable piece. I'm curious if this is letting go of the idea that there is like a perfect way to do this, right? Like, and that sounds again kind of like an obvious thing, but again, think about it. You go to school and you think, oh, I am going to like learn how to get an A on this test, right? Like I am going to learn like the things to say or like the instructions or whatever. And this is fundamentally like a skill set that is, we're gonna kind of like figure this out together and we're gonna build this together, and we don't even know exactly always what we are building together, but we're like, the notion is that we are in community and we're doing this together. And that is like, it is a humbling thing. It is like forces you to like let go of things. And so yes, I very much, I come out of like the creative arts, and I believe that this is somewhere that like thinking about this, both for students, but then like for everybody, of like, how do we do good dialogue together better? To think about it more like an art than a science, maybe, is like a really good place to be, because if you're waiting to like get the book that'll give you like, here are the 5 things to say to make every conversation work, like that book exists and it's terrible. Like, like don't listen to it, because it's going to be different, and you're going to have, it's about human connection and it's about figuring it out, and that's a humanities and arts skill, and it requires kind of getting in that space rather than I'm a really good student, I'm going to win, I'm going to do this right. Like, I don't know if that's similar to how you all are finding it.
I mean, definitely, on a college campus, it's all about student involvement, particularly if it's undergraduates. So one of the things that we learned with Congress to Campus was, even though with the first one we couldn't have student involvement in the planning, the first year we actually did have the students design the questions to ask the former members of Congress. But they came from the forensics club, and they had a certain kind of enthusiasm that maybe other students might not have. So then the next year, what we figured out was, if we had a QR code, and this is the whole notion of not getting canceled, right? That the students could hold their phones up, get the QR code, and then send in questions anonymously. And that worked out fantastic, because the students who, like in my institution, it's almost like, you know, they're shamefully center.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Like,
I
oh,
believe in private property. What?
Right,
Like,
exactly.
I'm not lefty enough to be
Right,
at this institution.
Exactly. So they're just like, you know, what if I want to ask about, you know, voter suppression in this way and not that way? Then the questions come up on the screen. No one knows who asked the question, and then the former members of Congress can address it.
Yeah. I also want to give a shout out to Macalester, because I know this isn't a program you're doing, but I'm fascinated by it as a campus known for its more liberal political bent, typically, is also doing a partnership in cooperation with Braver Angels to pair students and faculty from Macalester with the University of Northwestern, just up the street, but arguably a very different sort of political landscape and an assumption about students and faculty there. And I think that's just a really interesting way of pairing people up and giving them this experience to talk to each other and hear a different perspective. Dr. Harris, I'm going to stick with you for a minute, because you've been a part of the Macalester community since 1994, I believe. You've written a number of books. You've been appointed to several local state boards and commissions. You've been a part of this world for a long time. So maybe specific to campuses, but even more broadly, I'd love to hear your thoughts on civic discourse and political conversations over time. I think it feels like it's gotten worse, but has it? And what do you think? I mean, from your vantage point.
I mean, I think it depends on where you are, but overall, I try not to be a pessimist, but this seems to be like challenging times. And I think that part of it is that we have lots of generational clashes, right? And I say that because I spend most of my time with people, brace yourself for this, the entering class was born in 2006. Right?
No.
And so that is a worldview that's very different from mine. But then
2006?
2006. Isn't that special?
That's
And
wow.
right, but then right, but you know, then we have, you know, our leadership might have been born in the 1930s. And so navigating all of that has made this a very contested moment, because these different generations see the world very differently. And also there is some hostility in terms of how some generations feel that others are in their way. And that is not something I felt like, say, in the 90s or 2000s at all.
Any other thoughts on political discourse overall, or do we? I think that's good.
That's good enough for now.
That's good enough for now.
Ask somebody
That
else.
could be a whole panel on its own. I will say, start thinking about questions. I have one or two more, and then we'll open it up if there are audience questions. Dr. Font-Guzmán, you've worked in DEI and leadership roles in higher education for nearly 20 years. I think relatively new to St. Kate's, right? About 2 months.
2 months.
So very new. You've worked in both Virginia and Nebraska before starting in this role. Are there any lessons you've learned in your career from different universities, from different parts of the country, in this space, and how you might be applying that work in Minnesota and at St. Kate's?
Yes, I think generally speaking and collectively, I think we sometimes do too little, too late, and too performative. Historically, I'm not talking about now. I think that there are some changes that are happening clearly, as we're hearing here from my colleagues and the work we're doing. But I would say 3 things are mainly at the heart of what I have learned about doing this work. And one is we don't have enough skills in dealing with conflict. We tend to avoid it. And I was curious enough about conflict that I actually went and got a PhD in conflict. So we we need to engage with each other. And if we're just going to choose as a conflict style every single time avoiding something, we're not going to move. That's not a good way to make change. So that's one thing, because we don't have the conflict skills and we don't engage, and so then we just preserve a status quo, which tends to suppress the person that is usually at a more disadvantage. And the other things is, in terms of what I use as my theory of change, is you need to disrupt the systems, because they're not working, so there has to be disruption. And that can take many shapes and forms, but we need to be disruptive. The second one is we need to stay connected. We need to connect within affinity groups and across differences. That is that is kind of the fabric. That's how we weave our society and become a community. And the last one would be, we need to have fun. I mean, this is hard work. So everywhere I go, I celebrate the heck out of a milestone, right? We just need to do it. And so that's what I have learned over the years. If we disrupt, if we connect, if we kind of continue to have fun, that we can actually make some significant changes.
I love that. And Tane, I'm headed to you for this next, because you've employed fun and humor and comedy in a lot of your work, kind of tackling partisanship.
Yeah.
Why does that matter? How does it help?
Oh, yeah. I think it's absolutely fundamental. I mean, like, one of my truisms in life, which I think speaks to this, like, what we're talking about, is like, don't trust someone who can't ever laugh at themselves, right? Like, I mean, that's like a very fundamental thing. And there's a lot of those people, like, and I'm not saying that to scorn them, but I think that it's actually like a muscle in some ways that we have to like practice, like, in something that we have to be good at. But again, like, the ability to like laugh at ourselves or laugh at some of, what's happening, like, is something that opens us up. It makes it so we're more capable of doing that connection. I use this quote a lot, but it means a lot to me. Stephen Colbert said in one interview, like, why Stephen Colbert, particularly when he was at the Colbert Report, like, was using humor to do a lot of like news-based stuff, and he was like, I don't believe that you can be scared and laughing at the same time. And so if you can get a group of people together, even if they share, like, even if they're very, very different and they have very different points of view, if you can get them laughing together, they will maybe not agree, but they will be not as scared of each other, right? Like, and they will be able to see each other as human beings in a different kind of way, because they're sharing something that is like a fundamental human thing. This is a true thing. I'll tell you, laughter is actually older than language. Like, we were laughing as beings like before we were talking. And so there is a piece, like, if you can have fun, if you can get people to laugh, like, you can get people to let go of some of the things that we kind of generate about why I am so angry or upset with this person. And so I think that that's a huge piece of it.
I love that.
For me, it's crucial. Like, if I can't have fun, I'm not doing it, and I'm not bringing anyone else into it either.
Right.
Yeah. And again, I do think that this is something that is changing. And I don't want to like totally say that this is a total generational thing, because every generation has fun or whatever. I do think that like there was a period of time where we were sort of like, well, people should go to this conversation because it's like the right thing to do, right? Like, you should go and participate in democracy or X, Y, and Z. You should like go be part of your school board or whatever, because it's the right thing to do. And it's like, yes, absolutely, it's the right thing to do. And like, think about how much different it is if you're like, and actually you will enjoy it. Like, I mean, how much more of an invitation that is to a broad, diverse group of people to be part of that. If you can offer like, this is a good thing, and it will be something that you'll actually enjoy. It opens that up so that you're not sort of just like, come on, everybody, like, join me in this drudgery. Like, no, join me in this like joy and goodness that we can do together.
Well, if you free yourself from it always having to be like, we're coming to agreement on something,
yes,
right?
that's a huge
we're not
piece.
going to agree. And I think we often approach these conversations like that's the end goal.
Right.
When often that shouldn't be the goal to start from. I mean, maybe eventually you'll find agreement, but actually probably not.
Yeah, the tyranny of
still
consensus,
respect?
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that we're all going to eventually all agree on everything, and like that can absolutely be used like as a weapon sometimes, which is like not helpful.
Absolutely. I have more questions, but I'm also curious what you folks might be interested in. So does anyone have questions for the okay, I'm going to walk
wow.
around and bring the microphone.
That's good.
Your hand went up first, so I'm coming to you. Maybe just say your name and tell us who you are and what question you have.
Carol Chomsky, University of Minnesota, professor emerita now, so I'm not on campus. I'll just comment, I participated in some Braver Angels discussions. I think that resonates with the things you're talking about. But I'm wondering if you have thoughts about how what you're talking about translates into the difficult moment we're in now with campus protests and conduct codes and the responses to that, because it's great, and we've been in conversation at the University of Minnesota, various people across campus, including folks from the Humphrey, about starting these kinds of conversations and having these kinds of programs, but then that's like, you know, creating the environment to, in a few years, affect all of that. So how do you see that working in the moment? And then, of course, we've had presidents having to resign over so it's very political too. So I just think there's a different aspect of this, and I wonder if you have thoughts or interactions on that aspect of it.
We've moved to a policy where we have behavior, conduct, expectations. And so when we were having our discussion around Dobbs, two of my advisees made signs, which we had said you weren't allowed to bring in. Somehow they managed to do that and stood up and said a few things. And they were quietly escorted out, which is the kind of thing that we didn't have things in writing the way that we do now, that this is how we need you to behave, and if you don't, we're going to ask you not to be here. So that's where we are.
Time, place, and manner kind of restraint.
Yeah, and I mean, part of it was different. So people outside of the building were protesting, and we were like, that's fabulous. It's a college campus. But then inside, we were in an auditorium, and we were trying to have the discussion. And so we said, if you're opposed to the discussion, you can stand outside and protest. You can't, like, shut the discussion down.
One of the practices that I've seen us take on is this notion of that we need to care and care for one another, and we need to do dialogue with the aspect of doing no harm with one another. And introducing those concepts into the room has been really powerful. So it's less adversarial. I feel like as a staff member, I have an obligation to model how that happens. How can we have difficult conversations together? If a group of students are having a challenging time, or they're protesting against us, or some type of activity, that we engage in conversation and dialogue about that, that we invite those conversations to happen, and we create those spaces. We'll bring the food, we'll buy the pizza, whatever it takes, and talk through that. And encouraging that dialogue to happen, as opposed to this stance of winning and just wanting to discourage folks from engaging and just saying you're wrong. So we're trying to invite and create space where we come together as staff, administration, leaders, students, to co-create those conversations that are sometimes difficult. And that has been a powerful lesson in helping students to trust that those spaces are okay to share and come and show up, in addition to the protests.
Yeah.
All right. Come over here next.
All right. Thank you. So Dr. Font-Guzmán touched upon this a little bit, but as we see with the pro-Palestinian protest, there's an immediacy in the protests, and that they're asking the administration to divest from Israel because they believe that Israel is a genocidal regime. So as part of this, creating this dialogue across campus, I'd like to hear the other panelists address how the administration is improving the dialogue between them and the students that seek change.
Can you say another word about what you mean by the word proving? Yeah, like you're saying, like, I mean, like proving. Did I hear you correctly? Like to that they're. I guess I've just lost the.
I think the divesting part is where you said. I think that's what.
Improving. Oh, thank you. That's why. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, real briefly, we had faculty members who would sit down and talk about the situation together in a room, and as long as students and faculty came together and talked and shared ideas about what's happening on the ground and exchanged that. I mean, just that immediate, like, how do we create space? How do we instantly flatten things, whether it's in the classroom or alongside the classroom? How does our community respond and create those spaces? That is in addition to, and not to silence protests, to recognize they each have roles, but enter in the spirit of learning.
Yeah.
Right. I think for us also one of the issues that happened before I came at St. Kate's, but relatively recent, I think it was summer, there were some student protests, and we have an organization that is Students for Social Justice for Palestine, and actually they just submitted an application to become a formal organization and club at the university, which means they can get funded, and absolutely we said, yes, please go ahead and do that as any other organization. But one of the things that emerged out of that is that the timing of the universities, and Case realized that they didn't have a written policy on demonstrations, and so they wrote one. And the community in general and many of the students were like, oh, you're doing this to suppress our voices when we're asking for some things that we really want to know. So one of the things, I guess I was charged with it in the first 2 weeks, really early on, was our president wanting to go back and say, this policy is important enough in the days that we're living and the times that we're living in, to be able to have more input community as to what this would look like. So we have developed a task force with representation from everyone, faculty, staff, students, from all our 3 colleges, not only College for Women, but also our adult education and our graduate students. And we're gonna start meeting this semester to say, how do we want to collectively be with each other when there's protests, and how do we want to support each other, and what is the impact? So that is one way we're trying to address specifically, not only for Palestine, but for any other issue that may emerge. So again, bringing the community into it, it doesn't mean that every single policy that we're going to do at an academic institution is going to have that high level of participation, but this one seems like the times we're living, it's important. So we'll put out a survey for those who are not on the task force with some specific questions. What do you think? I think those are ways of addressing the needs of our community in ways that are meaningful, and it's not just conversation or dialogue for the sake of dialogue.
Yeah, and because I know we're short on time, so one other piece that I'll just say very quickly, because I wear another hat where I'm actually like a trustee on another college that I'm not here in that role today. But one of the things that I think that colleges are learning is that these same things that we're teaching students and faculty about the importance of being able to go out there, be curious about why people think what they think, share your own story of why you believe what you believe. Those are things institutions have to do too, and they have to be in that conversation with other people. And you know that there was probably a time where I think a lot of institutions, in some cases, thought they could get away with sort of like, well, we wrote the thing and we are handing it down, and you all will just take it and understand it. And I don't think that that's going to cut it. And I think that more and more institutions are realizing places like their administration, their boards of trustees, their regents, whatever it is, have to actually engage in these conversations and listen. And then if they do have a point of view, they have to say, here's why we believe this.
And I think the reason it's so scary is because that requires sharing power, as opposed to power over, right? Here's a policy, take it or leave it. And that's what's scarier about entering into those conversations from the standpoint of administration, right? Like, oh, I have to share my power, like as president or VP or member of a classroom or a faculty. And so I think that is where the real work is. How do we share our power so that we're really in community together?
I just want to add
Please.
quickly, I was inspired by something that Tane said earlier about not dealing with something as challenging as Palestine as the first that then you're in the fire. And so one of the things that we benefited from is that we had dealt with fossil free a few years ago, such that students who had lobbied the trustees to divest from those companies, possibly the first-year students last year, that had happened maybe the summer before it came. It was soon enough that people understood that you could talk to them, it would come to a vote, it might possibly go your way. So there was some buy-in there, and there was also an understanding of the process. Because when the process started, I'll never forget, some of the students said, you talked about President Rivera, we're gonna go stand in her yard. And I was like, that sounds fascinating.
Sure.
I was like, however, she
That's a
doesn't even
choice.
get a vote. And I was like, so there's an organizational flow chart, and here it is on the website. And if you look at it, you'll see that she's an ex officio, and that's what that means. And you should find these people.
Yeah, and I do want to add something because this has been brought up, and this is triggering something else. That sometimes we also want to put the fire out too quickly.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
And it clearly, I mean, we do have to, sometimes prevent that. But, I think learning how to be okay with a little bit of fire, because honestly, that's the only way we change.
Yeah.
If we're too comfortable, if everything is okay. So I love personally the students that are out there challenging us every second by saying, you have offended me, this is racist, or Palestine, or whatever whatever it is, because they are the ones that make us better. So I think being able to sit with that discomfort and say, okay, they're protesting, let them protest.
Yeah.
Oh, they're doing, okay, let them do it. Like, we shouldn't run quickly to suppress those conflicts, because then we don't give our chance to really understand fully.
Yeah.
And so I think that's another big one. Like, just learn how to sit with it for a while. We don't need to solve everything immediately.
And we're teaching future leaders who are going to take the skills
Exactly.
that they're using within the university context and change our communities, our states, our legislators, in the our world. And so if they don't get the university campus experience to hone those skills or be introduced on ways to be effective, then I think we're doing them a disservice.
Well, believe it or not, it is 5:15, and so we're going to wrap it up there. Please join me in thanking our panelists for their insights and perspectives.